Welcome everyone to It Tastes Different Gaming Appetizers. And did you know Final Fantasy VII Rebirth isn't doing so hot, according to some. So there's a couple articles floating around out there about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is basically selling half of what Remake did in the same time frame. They're contributing this to a couple of different factors, but they're basically saying one thing is pointing to the Remake came out at the beginning of the pandemic, so April 2020. So they're saying that contributed to more sales because more people are stuck at home, and more people are playing games, and stuff like that. I have my own opinions, and so do these guys, and we'll probably kind of get into those too. But it's probably a couple of factors, right? Maybe the pandemic played some into it. And then they also talk about how sequels don't typically do as well as the first one, just because, if you haven't played the first one, you're not likely going to get into the second one, right? And if you played the first one and you didn't like it as much, you probably are less apt to play the second one. I mean, it's just common sense, right? If you have to play the first one to know where you're at in the second one, it's hard to pick up people to play that didn't play the first one. So you are going to have less number of sales of people that didn't like the first one that aren't going to move into the second one. That, to me, that's a no-brainer, right? And yeah, you do. I mean, technically, you could just hop in if you don't care about the story and play. But so that's a rough one. But the whole pandemic thing is kind of, maybe it was at the beginning of the pandemic, and I don't think games took off that quick in the beginning of the pandemic. It took a little while and they ramped up. But some other things that are kind of interesting to note is that Final Fantasy VII Remake had an 87 Metacritic score. Rebirth has a 92, which could also contribute to just less people voting, right? Because less people are playing it. It has an 8.1 user score for Remake and a 9.0 user. Rebirth has a 9.0 critic rating, so on Metacritic. So it's kind of all over the place. It's like, where do you justify this? But I would say that it's a couple of contributing factors. And and Sony's going to call this game a failure. They're all going to call this game a failure. Square-Enix and Sony, and everybody's just going to be like, this game's a failure. I also think that, anytime that you make a game exclusive for one console and not the other, you're just asking for problems. That whether that be Sony, whether that be Microsoft, whether that be Nintendo, whoever, I don't give a shit. If you put out a game on one console and not the other, you have already restricted yourself. So in my opinion, if you want more sales, put it out on as much as you can, right? Because Rebirth's not on PC, is it? Yeah, it's supposed to get it. There's no word on a PC release, but games like that typically do come out on PC later. I don't know, man. I'm torn on this because I myself really did not like Remake. Nowhere near as much as I got that backwards. I loved Remake way better than I liked Rebirth. Rebirth to me was a far cry from what Remake was. I found Rebirth very boring. The open world aspect of it was very meh. I was like, can I just get past all this crap and get into because every zone, this is my opinion, every zone was the same thing. It was like a Ubisoft clone, because you find the radio towers, you climb up, you power them up, and you can find everything around you, and you go do it, and then you move on to the next area. Find the radio tower, power it up, find everything around, you go to the next area. And I'm like, this is just so boring. And the mini games and stuff were annoying in that game. Like, I hated the whole sneak up on the chocobo thing, or the damn dolphin riding. I hated the dolphin riding with a passion. Stupidest thing ever. But, that's just me. I would rate Rebirth less than Remake because I liked Remake. Remake was freaking awesome to me. And granted, I have never played the original Final Fantasy VII. So I have no baseline. My baseline is just off of the current game. So, and I liked the story. The story in Remake kept me going. I'll be honest with you, the story in Rebirth, I glazed over because it just didn't seem too interesting. I got so annoyed in the very first part of the game where you're running around in that little village with Cloud. I'm like, oh, this is so annoying. I'm walking and this is the slowest pace ever. Just let me get the hell out of here and go do what I want. And then in the beginning, if you veer off course, instead of Cloud being able to run somewhere, you gotta like freaking walk like you're running through syrup or something, you know? So I can see a lot of things. I can see its rating higher. Rebirth is rating higher than Remake because less people have played it and less people that were critical of it has voted on it. Because I would give it less, in my opinion, than Remake. Rebirth would get a less score for me than Remake. Shane's probably the biggest Final Fantasy VII Remake hater in the group. What did you think of Rebirth, and why do you think it's trending and selling a lot slower than Remake?
I liked Rebirth better. Not a lot, but I did like it better. It did have a little more Final Fantasy VII feel to it when you hit the open world. Now, that's also where I also had problems, too. I don't like the open world of it too much because it felt very Ubisoft, just like you described. Once you hit the tower, you see all this garbage pop up, and Final Fantasy should be about exploration of the open world. Just coming across these things, finding these things. I got to go to this village here, but on my way there, I'm going to kind of veer left, right, whatever. That is my problem with it. Dragon's Dogma 2 has a more Final Fantasy feel than Final Fantasy does with their open world exploration part. I don't mean like combat or anything, but just the way you can explore the world, the way you can stumble upon things, find just the randomest things. I sent Pat before we did a review. I'm like, man, did you find that elf village? That is cool. That's what I want from Final Fantasy. I want the exploration of it. Final Fantasy, the remakes that they've been doing, Remake and Rebirth. I hate the freaking naming too. They lose a lot of what I think they lost a lot of what made those games great. Final Fantasy Remake, I didn't hate, don't get me wrong. It's still a very good game, but it was way too goddamn much filler. Way too much filler. It was so much, it just kind of took away from the Final Fantasy experience that they were doing well with. And then Rebirth, once you hit the open world, it felt more like Final Fantasy, but I didn't like how they set the open world. The story and everything is still good, I think. I think the story plays better in Rebirth. But I think a contributing factor is the fact that they took a game and they're making it 3 parts for one story. I think people are bothered by the fact that they're taking more than 2 discs, 2 releases to do it. There was no reason for it. Honestly, they could have done everything they did in Remake and in Rebirth, and if they got rid of all that filler, they could have put those together and made one game. They could have, just plain and simple. Now, granted, they're trying to milk it out for what it's worth, and you kind of can't blame them because Final Fantasy has such a nostalgia and such a fervorous fan base. You kind of can't blame them for milking it out. But when they did it, though, they lost the passionate people. I think. I think the passionate people were kind of burnt by some of the things they did with Remake. I mean, Rebirth is a better game, but Remake was the introduction into the whole Remake setup of the storyline, and people wanted to know, especially those that love the original. Now, Pat, you didn't grow up. You didn't play the original Final Fantasy VII, and so you have a whole different view of this game, and which I kind of wish I did too. I think I would enjoy it better. I probably most definitely would enjoy it better because I don't have the knowledge of things that are coming, because there's certain story beats, Final Fantasy VII, Remake, Rebirth, and whatever the hell the next one is called. There's certain story beats they have to hit, and so you're kind of expecting those. I truly think the reason that Rebirth has not done as well, one, I don't really think COVID happening did a whole lot, but it probably did contribute, let's say 5% to the sales. So let's, we'll give it a little bit of credit, but I just don't think it contributed that much. I think the nostalgia of Remake contributed to, 95% of it. Um, I think the fall of Rebirth is the fact that Remake didn't feel like Final Fantasy for a lot of people. It's still a solid game. I mean, if you look at it as a purely game aspect, like Pat looks at it, it's a solid game. But if you look at it how I look at it, as somebody who played the original multiple times, who loved that game, it's a different game. There's just certain things that don't hit right. That's me. So I think that's probably a big contributing factor. I don't think I'm the only one. But Nick, I think you liked it like just as much as Pat. So why do you think that Rebirth has declined in sales compared to Remake?
I think it. I think it has to do mainly with the kind of the stuff that Pat went over, not about the game and how it plays or anything like that. Because if you've gotten that far, you've already made the purchase, right? So I think it's mostly about the people that bought Remake, and kind of what Pat said, they didn't like it, so therefore they didn't move on to Rebirth, or maybe they did enjoy it, but they got other things going on in their lives, and so maybe they'll pick up Rebirth at some point in time, but they just don't have time right now. And these types of games, Remake and even Rebirth, they're a huge time investment. And especially for a lot of people, when they want to play a game like this, they've got to find the time in their lives to invest a large amount of time to putting into one game, right? Especially if you're the kind of person that plays a lot of different games. When I'm playing, I mean the same way. Like, if we're gonna play a game that's gonna be hundreds of hours, I gotta be in the right mindset for it. Because if I'm not gonna put 100 hours into it, right? Regardless of how good or not good it is. If I don't have the right mindset at that time that I want to invest time in this, I'm gonna lose focus and move on. So, um, and that's unfortunate because they are games I want to play. I just don't feel like it, right? I don't feel like investing a lot of time. I've ran into that with a lot of games before that I know are big, long games. I'm like, oh man, I just don't want to put the time into this. Um, but I think there's several factors. I'm sure Remake probably did sell more because of the pandemic. I'm sure that it had some um, influence into that. I also think it was just because it was a new Final Fantasy. I mean, it was a remake of the original, but it was a new one coming in. The people who were nostalgic for it bought it. The people who never played it before bought it. And then, the people who bought it afterward were the people who were already going to buy the sequel after playing the first one, right? Um, so, of course, you're going to lose people off of, you're not going to have the same sales number as you did for Remake. And regardless of how good or bad you thought Remake was, not everybody who bought Remake is going to go turn around and buy Rebirth, right? And I think, and I'm going to say that the next game is probably going to be called Final Fantasy Reunion. Um, and I think that one is probably not going to have as high as sales as even Rebirth. I think the sales will be even lower, not because of some people liking it, some people not, and everything like that. But again, the same factors of time investment and around the time that it releases, and the people that don't like Rebirth, right, aren't going to buy Reunion. I'm saying it now. It's going to be called Reunion. Are not going to, the people that didn't like Rebirth are more than likely not going to buy that one. And so I think you'll see probably an article when that comes out talking about how the sales are even less for that game than Rebirth was, right? And that's just, and I think that also factors into sequels. You know, a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times sequels don't take off as well as the first game does. Sometimes they do, but
I will
sometimes they
bet you a shiny penny right now. They will not call it Final Fantasy VII Reunion. Do you know why?
Why is that?
Because
Why?
they just came out with Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core Reunion. I don't think they'll double down on the reunions.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. Now, I could be wrong. I mean,
Shiny Penny, it will be called Reunion.
Oh, you heard him, Pat. You hold the pennies, Pat. I just don't see them because I was trying to remember because Final Fantasy Crisis Core, the remake that's out on everything, is a much better Final Fantasy than Remake or Rebirth is, my opinion. But when you were saying Reunion, I was like, I think that's what they did with Crisis Core too. So, but anyways, my penny is
Crisis
your penny.
Core Reunion. We'll see whose penny wins when it gets announced. But I also think
better be shiny.
I also think the last thing too is something that you had said, Shane. Oh man, what was it? It was something about oh shoot, now I forgot. You got me thinking about shiny pennies, and I can't think about what I was going to say, but maybe I'll think about it here in a minute. But I think the overall factor is it's just that type of stuff. I think the third game will also sell less than Rebirth will. I think that's just how it's going to happen. Like I said, with remakes or with not remakes, but sequels and stuff, they typically, not always, sometimes sequels do better than the original. But most of the time it's the opposite, right? The first one does really great and the sequel kind of teeters down, right? Not always the case, but it is the case a lot of the time. So I think that's just the case here. Also, oh yeah, I remember now that I got the shiny penny in my head. I think it only coming out on PlayStation hurts it. I think it hurt it for Remake. Remake is now on PC, but it took a while. I think it took until the DLC for Remake came out that it actually came onto PC. And I'm sure Rebirth will come to PC, but I think that's just hurting Square with the sales. You know, Pat had said at the beginning, I think it would have been better for them to release it on everything, PlayStation, Xbox, and PC, day and date, you know, just as soon as it comes out.
What about
and
Switch?
That would have been better for sales all around. No. Sorry.
No, you're right. I mean, when you cut out just Xbox alone, that's probably an additional 30% in sales you could have got, because a lot of Xbox fanboys, they would have died to have played Final Fantasy Remake. I mean, just to be able to have said, I've played Final Fantasy VII on my Xbox. So, which is kind of an odd choice since Crisis Core came out on Xbox, the remake. And Pat, you should play Crisis Core. That is a much better Final Fantasy VII than Final Fantasy VII. But no, I think you guys are absolutely right on everything. I honestly think the sales might do a hair better than Rebirth though, because it should be the last game to complete the story. I think that'll draw more people in. Not much, but I think it will, because some people want to, they want to see that last big boss fight. Because Final Fantasy VII, the original ending boss is very nostalgic to me. To me, that was just as big in the story as Aerith, committing suicide by standing there. So I think there's a chance, whatever the third one's called, I'm not going to call it Reunion because I don't feel you're right. I think it will do a hair better in sales personally. And there's another shiny penny I'll put on it
too. I mean, yeah. So I don't know. But I mean, I think the big thing that they're all harping on is that it's barely made it half as many sales, right, as Remake. So they're saying that, I don't know, man. Maybe they'll call it Final Fantasy VII Requiem or something. I don't know. But, you know.
Oh, I know the scene I want to see.
You can only make it so far on nostalgia, right?
Right.
And it's nostalgia will only get you so far.
Right. But I mean, yeah, but it's like for some reason it's lost half of the player base. And there's no difference. I mean, like, you know, as much as I would like to see it come to other consoles, you know, the Xbox and PC at release date, Final Fantasy Remake only came out, like I said, on PlayStation at release date, and it did exceptionally well. But so they're saying, you know, that I think something else is off, and I really don't know how to put that on there, because that's half. It sold half as many in the same amount of time, which is a huge drop in the bucket, a huge drop in the amount of sales, right?
And it could have been 16 as well, right? 16.
Did Remake?
Yeah, 16.
Did Remake come out? It came out in 2020, right?
2020.
Did it come out on
April 2020?
PlayStation 4 as well?
Yes.
See right
it didn't
there.
Come out to PlayStation 5 until later.
Yeah, it wasn't out on PlayStation 5. But yeah, so they probably had a more saturation of the player base as well, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, because it originally did come out on PS4. That was the original release, came out on the PlayStation 4 towards the PS4's end of life cycle before PlayStation 5 was out on the market. So you had a huge install base at that time, right? And probably games slowly trickling out compared to, because the PS5 was getting close to releasing, right? Because it released the next year, right? In 2021, I think.
Yeah.
So that might have been a factor as well.
November, yeah, or something like that. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, and you know, and outside of that, all Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was kind of met with a lot of pushback due to graphics issues and stuff like that when it first came out. So probably could have slowed even more people wanting it, because people are complaining about the quality of the game and the way it looked. Because Final Fantasy VII Remake was like gorgeous. I thought it looked good. It was shiny and polished, and you know, for the most part, I didn't have a whole lot of problems with Rebirth as far as bugs or anything. But like I said, I really hated the open world aspect of the game and the way they did it. I mean, it seemed to me, you said that you know, Remake was filler. I feel like this was a lot of filler. Like the whole scene where you have to go find all the missing army camaraderies to build the parade. I'm like, oh my God, this is the stupidest thing ever. And then I got to play the little smash the button at the right time and remember to either hold the button or tap the button or jiggle the button or freaking throw it sideways. You know, I'm like, this is stupid. All the little stupid side quests and the little mini games.
The parade was in
the
original too.
Was it as bad? Like,
you had to do the button presses and stuff,
and you had to go find all the people that were like, gotta go find all the different troopers. And I'm like, this is annoying.
If you found a certain amount of troopers, it would help.
I mean, but because my FOMO it
wasn't as detailed as this.
My FOMO or my whole completionist shiny made me want to go find every freaking one of them. And I spent way too much time trying to find every one of them. I'm like, cool, I found every one of them. It says I did. And you know, so I'm like, this is stupid. But it felt like that whole getting into the Shinra main city, getting into the main city there, and then getting to the completion of the that whole storyline piece before you get on the boat was like drug on forever. It felt like it was just filler after filler after filler, and I'm like, oh God. And that part to me, but like I said,
sorry, Pep. That's a good point, though. You got to remember, Final Fantasy VII was released, 96? I think it was the original.
I think it was 97.
Yeah. But the game and what you were describing, Pat, made me think there were things like that in that game, but they were not as large. Like Nick was saying, finding everybody and doing the button presses for the march was not near as intense and as God, I don't know how to describe it, as just like heavy as Final Fantasy the remasters are. You know, those little things take up too much. You know, even though they were there originally, they took a 5-minute thing and they made it 35 minutes. See, I didn't even think about that to describe it, because Final Fantasy, this one here, Rebirth, has just as much fluff and filler and probably a lot more, honestly.
Like, I'll tell you what my favorite part of the game was, and it's probably not something that was in the original one, was Queen's Blood. Was that in the Final Fantasy VII game? Yeah, the Queen's Blood thing, in my opinion, was one of the better features of the game, and it wasn't even something they brought over. It was something new they added.
Yeah.
The card game.
And I agree. I like the Queen's Blood or Queen's Gambit or what the hell they called it. I really did enjoy that. And that was the thing that I really liked about Final Fantasy VIII was the card game that they put in it. I think it just added a whole aspect to the game that you could do. You weren't forced. I mean, there was parts of 7 you had Rebirth you had to play the Queen's Blood, but it's something you could just, oh, here's a guy, I'm gonna see what kind of cards he's got, or and you could just, you had something to take a break. They gave you a break and something really interesting to do. The Queen's Blood stuff was kind of hard to figure out for me at the beginning, but I really enjoyed it. I really did.
Yeah. So there's a lot of reasons, right? I mean, who knows what goes through other people's head, right? Like Nick mentioned, it could just been that they weren't in the mood for it. Because I agree with you in that. If I know it's going to be a long game, I have to be in the mood for it, right? I'm like, I got to bear down and be ready to just devote most of my free time to that game, because I don't know about you guys or most people out there, but I have a real problem with bouncing between a lot of games. Like, once I get in, especially like you take something like Final Fantasy and you get the mechanics down, and then you go to another game and you get the mechanics down, then you come back to like Final Fantasy VII and you're like, oh crap, how do I do this again? Because I didn't beat Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I did beat Remake, but I didn't play the DLC, the Yuffie one or whatever. Yeah, the Yuffie one. And I'm like, okay, so when Yuffie came in Rebirth, that was my first introduction to Yuffie, and I'm like, okay, so I missed a little bit of this, but not something I couldn't read to catch up. But like I said, I have that problem, and I'm like, oh crap, how do I do this again? And I quit, and I came back, and I went to go play the whole Siege game, the Siege mini game again, because you have to actually do that to progress the story at one point. And I'm like, how the hell did I do this thing again? And I was just getting raffle stomped, and I'm like, oh yeah, because I got, so it is what it is in that aspect. And I still have yet to beat Rebirth because I just haven't put in the time and don't have the time to go back to it. And I'll be honest, in my list of games, even my list of games that have come out in 2024, it's at the way low in the bottom. I know people have been talking about game of the year, but that game's not game of the year, in my opinion. It's not even in the ranking of top 3 for me anyway, and game of the year a lot of times is subjective. So
yeah. Now, you're right. Yeah. Final Fantasy is definitely not game of the year. I mean, but I agree with you. It's in my lower tier of things I gotta jump back into, because to me, Dragon's Dogma 2 is the much more superior RPG in every way. And but I am a little biased because I truly love the original, and this one here doubled down on everything I loved. So, but I think Final Fantasy VII Remake, the biggest issue with it, as far as the recreation of that game, was the fact that they broke it up. I think that's one of my biggest pisser offers. I think if they'd have made it a single game, I think they'd have been much better off. You're muted, buddy.
What?
I was gonna say, I think we could beat this subject to death. And we will if we keep going on and on. But at some point, we just got to let it be what it is, and let Square-Enix figure it out for themselves, because they will. They've been doing pretty horrible here lately, at least according to them. Some things I think that they're doing well on. They're like, no, they're out there playing the old monk game and self mutilating themselves with the whip. Just bad Square-Enix. We did bad. They didn't appease Daddy Sony, so it is what it is at that aspect. But I think Sony does make good games. I think they've been in a rough spot because 16 I didn't think was that great. It was okay for me, just okay. And I thought Rebirth was just okay. It didn't meet the high standards I had that they had set for me with Remake. But sometimes that happens with sequels. So, and let us know what you think down in the comments. Did you like Rebirth more than you like Remake? If you played it, did you play Remake and not Rebirth? And if you did, tell us why, because I'd like to know, did Remake just push you off that much, or are you maybe like Nick or us who just, you got to have time and you got to want to put that much time into a game and you didn't have time, so you just wait for it to go on sale? Which camp do you sit in? And with that, we have reached the end of another episode. If you're still hanging out with us, help us out and hit that subscribe button. We could always use more subscribers. We need some help to get those numbers up there so that we could keep doing what we do and talk about video games and running our mouth, so, and hit that bell to get notified when we put out new videos, because we put out multiple videos every week. So we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we hope to catch you in the next one.
See ya.